Question number 1. The first vertebra that support the head is called A, the sacrum, B, the axis, C, the atlas, or D, the coccyx. So your answer here is going to be C, atlas. Your atlas is also referred to as C1 because it's the first vertebrae on your cervical column. So your atlas and your axis work together, as you can see on the bottom left-hand corner. They fit together like a puzzle piece. Your atlas supports your head, and it also supports when you nod your head up and down. The skull rocks on the atlas at the occipital bone. And the second vertebrae, your axis, which is also referred to as C2, supports your head when you're moving from left to right. The axis acts as a pivot point when you're turning your head. So these two work together. Don't get them confused. Atlas supports your head, and that is also referred to as your C1. Question number 2. Sensory neurons are also called blank and conduct impulses to the spinal cord and the brain. A, afferent neurons, B, efferent neurons, C, motor neurons, or D, interneurons. Your answer here is going to be A, afferent neurons. Sensory neurons are also called and referred to as afferent neurons, and these conduct impulses towards the spinal cord and the brain, which is also referred to as the central nervous system, or the CNS. Now, these sometimes are confused with something called efferent nerves or neurons, and they pretty much do the opposite. Be very familiar with the reflex arc. The reflex arc basically tells you the pathway through the nervous system from a stimulus to the response that your brain is going to make. So this is how it works. Let's just say you have a sensation on your skin, such as maybe something hot, like you touched a fire or a prick. Well, your afferent neuron or your afferent nerve is going to take that stimulation, that sense, and it's going to take it to your brain, towards your brain or your CNS. And your brain is going to say, okay, what's my response? What should I do? And once it has the response, it's going to send this message to your efferent nerves. Your efferent nerves are then going to relay it down to your body. So let's just say your hand is touching something hot. Your efferent nerve is going to tell your hand to move away from the fire, from the sensation. So this is the difference between afferent and efferent. They go in two opposite directions. Again, afferent takes messages towards your CNS, and efferent takes messages away from your CNS. Question number 3. The rhythmic contractions of smooth muscle that forces and moves food in the digestive tract is called A, sulci, B, peristalsis, C, hydrolysis, or D, emulsification. So your answer here is going to be B, peristalsis. Peristalsis is a must know. You must know what this word means, and it is the action of the contractions of smooth muscle that forces the food in your digestive tract from one end to the other. Question number 4. Which of the following cranial bones come in a pair of 2? Is it A, the occipital, B, sphenoid, C, temporal and parietal, or D, temporal and ethmoid? So our answer here is going to be C, temporal and parietal. These both come in a pair of 2. On your left-hand side, you see that this is labeled 8 cranial bones. You have 8 cranial bones in total, or skull bones, and these include your ethmoid, which is just 1 bone, and your sphenoid, which is just 1 bone. Frontal is 1 bone, parietal is 2, temporal comes in 2, and your occipital is just 1. So these are all your 8 cranial bones. The reason why I included the picture on the right is because often the sphenoid and the ethmoid are really hard to envision unless you've actually done a dissection lab. You've actually tangibly touched a skull. They're really hard to envision. But if you cut the skull laterally and you flip it upside down, you can see the sphenoid and the ethmoid a bit better. These are both very, very delicate, light bones. The ethmoid is a lot lighter and smaller, and the sphenoid kind of spreads out and it kind of resembles a bat with its wings spread out. So just wanted to include that there, even though it's not really part of this question. So again, your answer is temporal and parietal. Both of these come in a pair of 2. Question number 5. The entrance to the stomach is controlled by which muscle? A. Pyloric sphincter, B. Cardiac sphincter, C. The diaphragm, or D. Upper esophageal sphincter. So our answer here is going to be B, the cardiac sphincter. A sphincter is a specific type of muscle that is circular and it acts like a valve to open and close certain parts of the body. Your cardiac sphincter is also known as your lower esophageal sphincter. So on the right upper side picture that I have here, you can see that I have UES and LES. UES stands for upper esophageal sphincter and LES stands for lower esophageal sphincter. The lower esophageal sphincter, again, it's also called the cardiac sphincter just because it lies near the heart. Also, answer A, your pyloric sphincter. That is the sphincter that allows food to exit your stomach and go into your small intestine. So that is the pyloric sphincter is found at the bottom end of your stomach, and your cardiac or upper esophageal sphincter is found at the top of your stomach. Question number 5. Which of the following represents the percentage of red blood cells in the body? A, albumin, B, hemoglobin, C, hematocrit, or D, fibrinogen? So our answer here is C, hematocrit. Hematocrit tells us the amount of red blood cells that are in the body. It's also abbreviated as HCT. Hemoglobin is closely related to that, but hemoglobin tells us how much iron is inside of our red blood cells because hemoglobin is an iron-rich protein that is found within each red blood cell. Question number 7. Which of the following organs cleans blood of impurities and cellular debris by filtration, as well as destroying old red blood cells? A, the liver, B, the spleen, C, the gallbladder, or D, the pancreas? So our answer here is going to be B, the spleen. The spleen is an organ that contains lymphoid tissue. Therefore, the spleen is part of the lymphatic system. And not only does the spleen filter out any waste from our blood, but it also harbors phagocytes and lymphocytes, which are active in our immunity. Aside from that, it's also important to note that the spleen produces our red blood cells before birth. Question number 8. The following hormone causes uterine contraction and triggers lactation. A, thyroxine, B, oxytocin, C, prolactin, or D, the growth hormone? So our answer here is going to be B, oxytocin. Oxytocin causes uterine contractions as well as triggering the milk to come out of the breast. So don't get this confused with prolactin because prolactin stimulates milk production in the breast, but oxytocin is what makes that milk come out of the breast. Alrighty guys, question number 9. Blood leaving the left atrium passes by which valve? A, the mitral, B, the aortic, C, the tricuspid, or D, the pulmonary valve? So our answer here is going to be A, the mitral valve. Let's go ahead and visualize this. Let's put the blood in the left atrium. Now, after the left atrium, the blood passes into your left ventricle, correct? And in order to get there, it must leave your mitral valve. We also call the mitral valve the left AV valve. We have a left AV valve and we have a right AV valve. The right AV valve is your tricuspid valve, and the reason why they're referred to as AV is because they separate the atrium and the ventricles, both of these valves. So AV, atrioventricular. Again, your left AV valve is also referred to as the mitral valve, and your right AV valve is also referred to as the tricuspid valve. So I included these photos here. I thought they were really, really cool, of a surgery on the right hand corner. This looks like a mitral valve to me, and the one in the middle, it looks like, because it has like that 3 slit, it looks like it could be a tricuspid valve, which again is also known as the right AV valve, right? Or it could be maybe an aortic or a pulmonary valve. But the thing that is very distinct about the mitral, you'll see that it looks different than the other 3 valves, right? With that being said, guys, when it comes to the cardiovascular system, the heart valves are an absolute must know. So make sure you memorize those. Question number 10. After the release of antidiuretic hormone, which of the following occurs? A, the renal tubes absorb less water. B, urination increases. C, fluid volume in the body increases. Or D, urine becomes less concentrated. So our answer here is going to be C, fluid volume in the body increases after the release of the antidiuretic hormone. So antidiuretic hormone is also known as ADH. That's the abbreviation. When blood concentration of sodium rises above normal range in the body, the pituitary gland secretes ADH. And this causes an increase in water reabsorption in the kidneys. And the reason why is this is to dilute the excess sodium. So for answers A, B, and D, in actuality, the exact opposite of this happened. So A, the renal tubes absorb less water. Actually, the renal tubes absorb more water. B, urination increases. Actually, urination decreases. D, urine becomes less concentrated. Actually, urine becomes even more concentrated. So on the top right hand corner, I have a picture of the pituitary gland. It's in red. And the reason I have this up is just to remind you that the antidiuretic hormone is released by the pituitary gland. It's not released in the kidneys. The kidneys just receive the message from the pituitary gland, or from the hormone. They receive the message to decrease urine output, decrease urine production, and increase urine retention by causing reabsorption. And also, on a side note, this is going to increase your blood pressure because we're going to have vasoconstriction of the blood vessels, which is going to increase blood pressure, but also we're going to have more fluid in the body, which is also going to contribute to increased blood pressure. Question number 12. Where are red blood cells produced? A, in long bones. B, in the red bone marrow. C, in the liver. Or D, in the spleen. So our answer here is actually going to be B, red bone marrow. Red bone marrow is actually found at the ends of long bones and in the middle center portion of all other bones. Just as a side note, there are 2 types of marrows in bone. There's red bone marrow, but there's also yellow marrow. And strangely enough, yellow marrow is composed largely of fat. Question number 13. What is the role of villi in the small intestine? A, to increase the surface area for nutrient absorption. B, excretes serum that helps break down fat. C, moves food down the digestive tract. Or D, absorbs excess bile. So our answer here is going to be A. It's to increase the surface area for nutrient absorption. So as you can see, I put down a picture on the right hand side and it says villi. Villi is the name for the bigger like bumps. And then each of those bumps have little tiny bumps, and those are called microvilli. So microvilli even further increase the surface area. Surface area, just more to work with so that our small intestine can absorb even more nutrients. So you can see that each villi is equipped with its own blood vessels. This is how nutrients go into the villi and transfer directly into the bloodstream. Also, each villi has a specialized lymphatic capillary called a lacteal. So this lacteal absorbs fats and they're absorbed into the lymphatic system because I think I mentioned before that the lymphatic system, one of its jobs is also to store some fat. Question number 14. The thickest part of the heart is called A, the endocardium, B, the myocardium, C, the epicardium, or D, the pericardium. So your answer here is B, the myocardium. Your myocardium is the muscular layer of your heart. And just as a side note, the part of your heart that has the thickest part of myocardium is your left ventricle. And the reason why is because your left ventricle has to work the hardest out of all of the other chambers in order to pump the blood all the way up against gravity, all the way up into your aorta. So I have two pictures here and they show the layers of the heart. There are three layers of the heart: the endocardium, which is the innermost layer, the myocardium, which we just talked about, the middle layer, and then the outer layer, which is the epicardium. Now, covering the three layers is something we call the pericardium. This is a sac that encloses the heart. So this pericardial sac is also referred to as the serous pericardium, and this pericardium is not to be confused with the three layers of the heart because it's not. It's pretty much its own thing. It's the sac. Now, this pericardium also has its own layers. It has its outermost fibrous pericardium, the parietal pericardium, the pericardial cavity, and then the innermost layer, which is the visceral pericardium. Now, visceral pericardium is kind of important because it just so happens to also be the epicardium, which is the outermost layer of the heart, right? So starting from the innermost layer, going out to the fibrous pericardium, we start with the endocardium, then the myocardium, then the epicardium, which is also the visceral pericardium, then the pericardial cavity, the parietal pericardium, and then lastly we have the fibrous pericardium at the very, very outmost layer of the heart. So I hope that wasn't confusing. The whole point of that was basically don't get the pericardium confused with the three layers of the heart. It's pretty much its own thing, and it's got all of these little layers within it as well. Also, I know these layers and layers within layers of the heart seem really tedious, but they are super important. Make sure you remember all of these layers and the function of each layer. Alrighty guys, last but not least, number 15, what is the role of glucagon in the pancreas? A, release to increase fluid retention. B, release to increase glucose in the body. C, used to decrease sodium levels in the body. Or D, used to decrease glucose levels. So our answer here is going to be B. Glucagon in the pancreas is released to increase glucose in the body. So the pancreas has two types of hormones that it releases. It releases insulin and it also releases glucagon. So both glucagon and insulin work together to regulate the blood glucose levels in our body. So this is how it works. If there's low blood glucose in the body, then the pancreas will release glucagon, and glucagon causes the liver to release stored glucose into the bloodstream. This therefore will normalize the glucose levels. Now, let's say in contrast, the glucose in the blood is really, really high. Then the pancreas is instead going to release insulin. And now the process of how insulin works on the blood is actually a bit more complicated. Insulin promotes the transport of glucose across plasma membranes, and thus this increases cellular glucose uptake. And once inside a cell, glucose is metabolized for energy. So the glucose is being used up. Insulin also increases the rate at which the liver and the skeletal muscles convert glucose into glycogen, the storage form of glucose, and the rate at which the liver changes excess glucose into fatty acids. These fatty acids can then be converted to fats and stored in adipose tissue or in the liver. So through all of these actions, insulin and the pancreas help lower glucose levels in the blood.